Thank you for having me. Look at that. It's like I now feel immense pressure to be really good, and if this is a terrible idea and I get booed, then the whole thing is going to fall apart around me. But never mind, it's going to be fine. So this is me, this is the book. Woo! I wrote a book. It's quite weird. And it's getting quite a decent response. I bizarrely found myself in the McKinsey top 5 recommended books of their summer reading guide, alongside like Bill Gates. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? But what I wanted to try and do today, basically, I wanted to pick up actually on a framing that Karolina Wygóra introduced into the room this morning in the context of Poland, but that I actually think is true across the board. I think we're in a moment of evolution. I think we could be in the most exciting time for the evolution of democracy you could possibly imagine, and actually for our wider societies. And the reason I say that, like, there are so many stories that I just would love to tell you right now. Like, I was just looking up, because the previous panel was making me think of the Indian neighborhood parliaments movement that's springing up in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. I was thinking of the stories that Claudia was telling, and there's the Standing Citizens Assembly in Paris. There are so many things happening all over the world, but the one I wanted to just bring into the room, I'm going to try and do 2 tools and a little story in my 15 minutes. The story I wanted to bring in was what's just the climax of what's been going on in Taiwan over the last decade. We have a friend from Taiwan in the room. But I wanted to just tell you a word about how Taiwan's COVID response worked, because it really was kind of world-leading, is world-leading, and fascinating how they've done it. Of course, they've had some reasons to respond very quickly, which I won't go into now, but the spirit that they responded in was one of saying, we will respond to this best if we respond together as a nation, tapping into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone in the country. And the way they did it, they lots of high-tech stuff. It is Taiwan, of course. So they crowdsourced and set challenge prizes to create apps that would track PPE availability and all this sort of thing. But the core of it was the idea of participatory self-surveillance. They'd never went into lockdown, trusting people, giving them the information, trusting their citizens to do the work. And my favourite story from within the story is they even set up a phone line where any citizen could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better. And a 6-year-old boy rang up and said, the boys in my class don't want to wear their face masks because they're pink and they think that they're girly. So you need to do something to make pink face masks cool, and I think you should work with the baseball team. And 3 days later, they had not only the little boy, not only the president, but half of the Taiwanese baseball team on the national televised press conference, resplendent in their pink face masks. And this, by the way, set off a wave of pink is cool memes around the country, and the Pink Panther was brought back onto primetime television, I'm told. But the reason why I tell the story is because when I interviewed Audrey Tang, who's the Minister for Digital Affairs, and I interviewed lots of people around this, one of the things she said to me really hit home, because I said at one point, the people of Taiwan must really trust the government for you to be able to do this. And the response was, we don't want people to trust the government. What I'm here to do and what I'm devoting my working life to is government trusting people. And that reframe was such a powerful thing for me, and I think speaks very powerfully to where we're at in this moment in time and what this task of evolution of democracy demands of us. Now, the first tool, with that in mind, hold that thought. With that in mind, the first tool I want to offer you is what I'm really setting out in the book, which is a way of seeing the world we're living in through the lens of what I call stories. And I think the dynamic that we have in this moment in time is that we think there are only 2 stories available. We've been living in what I call the consumer story for the last 80 years or so. The consumer story says that people are independent, they have stuff done for them. They're capable only of demanding and choosing because they're pursuing their self-interest. And the role of organizations and leaders is to serve them. This is not just in democracy, although I would argue it's very present there. I would argue we're trapped in a kind of consumer phase of democracy where people's only agency is to choose between things. But we're also there in the world of business. The social responsibility of business is to maximize its profits. The Milton Friedman thing is an absolute expression of consumer logic. We risk being trapped there, and that logic is not holding. And what's happening, and what we think we're doing, is defending against the rise of what I call the subject story. And this story is rising everywhere in so many ways and places. So the dynamic that's underneath that is this. We think that the problem is people don't trust politicians. But I'd argue, and I challenge all of us in this room to mull on, I think to a large extent politicians don't trust people. We don't trust each other. Those in positions of power don't trust the other. And that creates a reinforcing cycle. And when that reinforcing cycle, that vicious circle continues and continues and continues, what actually happens is that we go from the pink column to the yellow column. Because what happens is that some strongman leader comes in and says, don't trust them, trust me. And that's a structural weakness. So the tool I'm offering you is a way of seeing this moment in time that says, actually, there's another option. There's a whole other story that we can step into. We can see people not just as subjects or as consumers, but as citizens, as interdependent, as people who want to do stuff together with and through organizations, as people who fundamentally want to participate and create, and with whom the role of organizations and leaders is to facilitate. And if we think like that, then I think we can disrupt the cycle. Not actually by telling people to trust politicians more, but by getting politicians, those inside institutions, CEOs, business leaders, to trust people. And then it starts to flow very differently. And that, I think, is how we'll build something completely different. And that, I think, is what the story of Taiwan and what Audrey Tang said to me resonates with. So the tool that I'm really here, and I'm just going to say a few words about, because it's very early days in the development, but we're trying to think at the Democracy and Culture Foundation and with other partners, including Democracy Next, how do we make an intervention? How do we build something systemic that starts to carry this different story? And in order to find our inspiration for that, we've gone to what are the things that really carry the stories that are stuck in this moment. And one of the most powerful intervention points in any system, if you've ever come across the concept of systems thinking, is the measures of that system. People have been talking about this bit for a while, gross domestic product, right? Born in 1937, exerting a dramatic pull on our societies. But we're stuck with that. We can't seem to shift it. What you get when you see the world through the lens of these stories is that you see the power of the consumer story, and you start to think, what carries that? And that, I think, takes you to this, the Consumer Confidence Index. Born in 1967, trying to be an indicator of the extent to which people are going to consume more, as an indicator that drives government policy and drives our narrative thinking, drives our news media to focus on people's role as only consumers. And so the idea that we're working to develop is this, a citizen confidence index. What if we had a measure, to what Shivi was saying just now, that was asking a question, to what extent do the people in the society feel they have agency? To what extent do people feel able to shape the context of their own life? To what extent do people have meaningful power? And if we did that, I think we could end up in a very different place. The truth is, and there's so much research to prove this, when people have agency, when people have more agency, they take more responsibility. It is when you deprive people of agency that they take less responsibility and they start to get angry, perfectly understandably. When people have more agency, they're more creative. They're able to come up with ideas. They feel they can shape the context that they're working in. And because of that, also, when people have more agency, they tend to be more productive. They generate value. They come up with ideas. They create things. And that is precisely what we need, not just politically, but also economically. There is so much power in this moment in time if we can step into this different way of thinking of people, and if we can find the systems and interventions and processes that can unleash the power of people rather than try and protect democracy from it, in the words of Ece Temokran. Thank you for having me. If I have time to take questions, then I absolutely will. Oh, Farah wants to ask me a question. This is worrying.
Hi, Farah Nayeri. I'm from the New York Times. I had a question about the country that you are a citizen of and that I live in, the United Kingdom. Sorry. Because I see Citizen Confidence Index, and it would be fantastic if all citizens had equal voice in the choice of a leader. But the country is currently led by a lady, Liz Truss, who was chosen by 0.5% of the British electorate. And I won't comment on the consequences, but I would like to hear from you how you feel about this perhaps crisis of representation. I don't know.
Thank you very much. Well, sort of thank you. So look, I can answer actually by saying, I think this illustrates my point perfectly, and I think it's the same sort of answer that I hope Carolina might give. Maybe we are in crisis, and out of crisis comes opportunity. So I want to point you very specifically towards a campaign that I've been a bit involved in that launched about 2 hours ago, which is called the People's Plan for Nature. And so in response, part of what our so-called government has done in its first interesting days in office is they've launched essentially an attack on nature. One of the things they're doing is repealing all sorts of laws that protect green space and so forth. In response to that, a group of environmental NGOs, businesses, and other organizations have come together very quickly and are launching a process to crowdsource what we think from the British people, with a citizens' assembly planned as part of the process, to crowdsource and develop what we think the plan for British nature should be. And demonstrate in the process of doing that these sort of, we do have a crisis of representation, we do have a crisis of electoral democracy, which has some powerful aspects and can be part of the system, but when it gets corrupted, when it gets dragged down into this vicious circle that I was talking about, ends up in all sorts of trouble. And what we're doing is working with organizations to tap into the people, work together to show actually we want, this is what we as a democracy want to do. And then we'll challenge them and we'll see where we get. So I think what it speaks to is I respond to acknowledged crisis and catastrophe, and trust me, if you ask me how I feel, it doesn't feel great to be British right now. But I also respond from a place of going, maybe what I'll say is, Rebecca Solnit's definition of hope I love. Solnit talks about, she says, optimism is the belief that things will be all right no matter what we do. She says, pessimism is the belief that things will be shit no matter what we do, excuse my language. Hope is different. Both optimism and pessimism excuse us from action. Hope resides in the acknowledgement of uncertainty. And she says, hope is clarity plus imagination. Hope is the ability to see the troubles of the world for what they are and imagine what could be done and start to do it such that those things could be different. And that's what I'm trying to do.